name is Jackie White, and I'm foreman of the yard. And you don't mess with Jackie on this quayside. I'm as hard as iron plate. We'll be tied you if you're late. And we have to push a boat out on the springtide.
Sting is here. He is a singer and a songwriter, and some say music legend. He and his band, The Police, achieved stardom in the 1980s. He continued with a prolific solo career. He's had a hit song in each of the past 4 decades and has sold more than 100 million albums. He's back with his first album of new material in 8 years. It is titled The Last Ship. The record is set in Sting's hometown of Walsall, England. It also forms the basis of a musical created with writers John Logan and Brian Yorkie and director Joe Mantello. The Last Ship will make its world premiere in Chicago in 2014, June 2014. It will then go on to Broadway. I am pleased to have Sting back at this table, or certainly back in this room. Welcome.
Good day.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
8 years. What was going on?
You know, I make my living as a songwriter, but I went through one of those fallow periods where the songs simply weren't coming. The inspiration wasn't coming. The juice wasn't flowing. The juju had gone. I don't know. I always have said that if you have nothing to say, just shut up. I think it's always a good point. But I was starting to worry a little bit. And then I decided that I was getting in the way. That there's a certain amount of navel-gazing that goes on as a songwriter, kind of inward-looking constantly. And I was just sick of me. It was all me, me, me. So I wondered if there was something to do with my background, if I could write a dramatic piece based on where I come from. I come from quite an extraordinary town in England. The bottom of my street, we lived in the shadow of a shipyard where we built the biggest ships in the world. And my earliest memories of looking at the end of the street and seeing this mountain of steel blotting out the sky and the sun for most of the year. And then they'd launch a ship, and that was a kind of apocalyptic event for a young child to witness. Very frightening. I think in one of the songs I call it The Noise at the End of the World. And I'd watch thousands of men go to work every day and come back from work. My grandfather was a shipwright. My father built turbines for ships. And so I wondered if that was my destiny. I didn't want it to be. The yard was a frightening place. I wondered if I could write a story about the community I come from. And as soon as I decided to write for other people, to write for other voices than my own, other viewpoints than my own, other characters, the songs flowed very, very quickly. They came thick and fast. I think I described them as it's coming like kind of projectile vomiting. Yeah. And so I was very happy that that had happened, and I have maybe 35 songs that came in that period.
Now, is that the way it felt before you went into that fallow period? Things would just sort of come and like a projectile out of your
Sometimes
head and
you'd
mouth.
go through periods where songs came very, very, very fast, and then I'm used to these periods. Sometimes you have to be on input before you can be on output. So it's a normal thing. You can't just produce songs all the time.
Now, how does this fit into the idea of which many artists have said, whether they were in music or whether in literature or whether in painting, that what you have to do if you're an artist is go to work every day? You can't wait for a muse to come and inspire you.
I wasn't idle. I
you were on
toured.
tour occasionally.
I was
too.
on tour. I did thousands of shows. I also made albums, and I immersed myself in the compositions of other composers.
You did the lute?
I did the lute tour. Right. I even recorded some classical music, but I was learning the whole time, and I was ingesting musical theory, harmony, if you like. I wasn't sitting idle, but the songs weren't coming. But I think all of that work I did paid dividends when I did eventually start work.
Did you have confidence it would come back?
No, you never have confidence. You always imagine that this is the last song you'll ever write. And I think that's a very good place to be. It keeps you humble. It keeps you humble and keeps you learning.
When did you know it was a musical play? When did you know this is more than simply a collection of songs inspired by my childhood?
Well, is it a musical until it's had its first opening night? One doesn't know.
So Chicago will tell you?
Chicago will tell me a lot. It feels like a musical at the moment. People are getting very excited by the workshops we do and the performances we've done. But, it's a long shot.
But you can say
successful
this.
musical's a long shot.
You've chosen good collaborators.
I've chosen the best, and I have amazing collaborators. And I say to them, "Why this?" And they say, "Well, this is special. You know, most Broadway musicals are properties that people already know. Yeah. This is something original and new, so it's a long shot."
Yeah. You sat down with this guitar?
I wrote most of it on this little guitar. I sat in the corner of the room and doodled for a while. And
which comes first?
In this case, a lot of lyrics came first, a lot of stories.
Because it was easy to remember those stories.
There were people I knew who I wanted to write about. There were people I made up. There were composites of both. And once I started on the journey, the guitar was just there as my friend, and we had these conversations together.
How many young singers were there in Wilson?
How many singers are there in my town? Yeah. There are a lot of singers.
Did you grow up with a lot of young kids that so were inspired by music?
I suppose we were all, my generation were inspired by the Beatles, who came from a similar town. Liverpool is a similar port town, working class town in the north of England. The Beatles conquered the world with their songs, and so they gave a whole generation of people 10 years younger the permission to try the same thing. It worked out for some of us. I'm happy to say, I'm grateful that I was one of those people.
But when you were there as a young man growing up there, as a kid growing up there, I mean, did people come and say, you should be singing because you've got, you know, perfect pitch, you've got a great voice, you know, you've got beauty?
There were no real clues as to how you would get out of the town. I mean, I genuinely thought I would have to end up working in the yard, and my father would have been happy for me to get a job. I think when I did become a musician, he wasn't quite sure that it was a real job, even to his last days. But
my
he may have been right.
Thought television was a real job either. He said, "What is it you do? You go talk on television? That's not a job."
Yeah.
But you inspired by the Beatles, inspired by the fact that you had talent, and then there's the story of the Queen Mother. You know, comes up rolling up in a Rolls Royce.
We never had celebrities in our town except when they launched a big ship, and they would invite members of the royal family to the town to throw a bottle of champagne against the bows, and the ship would go off. And everybody got very excited when the Queen or the Queen Mother would come. And I remember standing there with my mother, with my little British flag, and the car was rolling slowly in a stately fashion. And she picked me out. She waved at me. And I waved my little flag
Eye contact.
back. There was definitely eye contact, I promise you. And I felt I'd been kind of infected with an idea. And the idea was that I didn't want to be on the street. I didn't want to end up in the shipyard. Yes. I wanted to be in that car.
In that Rolls Royce.
Yeah, exactly. So
going back to London. So what was in music was the road out?
You know, I was left the guitar at the age of 7 by an uncle who emigrated to Canada and had 4 strings. And I recognized it as my friend. I recognized it as a potential route of escape. And I didn't speak for years. I just sat and played this guitar.
Developed your skills naturally?
You know, I've always thought music was an obsessive-compulsive disorder. You know, it has a very positive effect, but it's, you know, who would play scales for 7 hours?
Because it's brain-connected, too, probably.
It's brain-connected. It made me smarter, actually. The guitar made me smarter.
So how did you get out?
Well, I studied at school. I got a scholarship to a grammar school in England, and they taught me Latin and French and a bit of philosophy. And I was kind of estranged from my community because I had to wear a school uniform. And the other kids I went to school with all left school at 15, and I went on to, you know, to college and whatever. So I kind of became separated from them. And I'd done a lot of work to escape. And it's funny how at a certain point in your life you realize you want to go back, at least in your imagination, to try and figure out who you are.
But there's something about you. I mean, with all the success of the Police, you wanted to go solo. I mean, you've always had a sense of looking beyond, it seems to me, where you are.
You know, I think being in a
kind of unease.
Being in a rock group is like being in a teenage gang.
Yes.
You don't really want to be in a teenage gang in your 50s or your 60s. Yeah. I mean, some people do.
You talk to Jagger about this?
Well, I mean, he's fantastic. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the Stones and Mick, but it's not for me. I don't want to be in a teenage gang at my age. I want to be free. I want everyone's role in my life to be very, very clear. It just makes life easier.
And how did you talk Mantella and Josh Logan into joining you? I mean, did they see the possibilities of this as soon as you brought it up to them?
You know, I drew up a list of the top people, and Joe Mantello and John Logan were up there, thinking never in a million years would they even entertain the idea, and they both volunteered. Logan was at the top of his game. I said, why have you done this? He said, my father was a Belfast shipyard worker.
Yeah, really?
This story I need to tell. I understand the dynamic between fathers and sons, this perennial struggle. I need to tell this story. Joe Mantello said, look, I saw your first workshop and I had no idea where it was going. You know, and it's unusual for me to be so intrigued by a story. Normally I'm looking at Beverly Hills Cop, the musical. I know where it's going. Yeah. The Last Ship is, wow, this is something new.
And how do you collaborate with them?
It's interesting because I don't collaborate very much. You know, my songs are sacrosanct. So I'm unused to people saying, well, it's a nice song, but it can't be in the play. You're not advancing narrative. You're not telling the story quickly enough.
Storytelling has a very different form now.
And so you know, it's painful and novel for me, but also I realize I'm in very, very safe hands here. I'm very happy about that. And you know, we have arguments and we have, you know, that there are debates, but the show is morphing all the time. Characters are morphing. The narrative is morphing. So sometimes the song becomes superfluous. But I'm doing all of the songs at the Public Theatre at the moment, not as a revenge or as a graveyard, but as a kind of alternative universe for where these songs may or may not have ended up.
And that's what's in the album.
That's the album I put out, yeah.
So the story, you know, obviously it's about the shipyard. It's about the town. It's about the last ship. It's about what happens to a place.
Well, I mean, it's rooted in social history and in what happened, you know, that economics trumped community. But what actually happens in the story is more of an allegory. I got the idea that perhaps the men could occupy the yard and build a ship for themselves, which is the idea of their priest who sees the effect on the community, the negative effect, and he wants to help. He says, go and build a ship. Yeah. Build it for yourselves and sail away, which is a very quixotic, Homeric idea.
Exactly.
It's just a gesture, a statement of what might have been.
And that's the idea that drives the story.
That's the idea that drives the story.
And who are your characters?
Well, I have there's a love story. There's a man called Gideon who left the town 14 years ago under a cloud. He ran away to sea. He comes back to deal with his father's death.
Is that you?
Is that me? Parts of me.
Yeah.
Parts of me.
Even the choice of the name.
The name is pretty close to my own, but that was unconscious, I promise you. There's a girl called Meg, who he left 14 years ago, and she's the real reason why he's come back, whether he admits it or not. So he has to deal with that. He has to deal with the estrangement from his community, and he has to help the men basically get the ship out of the river and out to sea, which he does unwillingly, but then he joins in. So there's all kinds of little strands and the struggle between him and his father.
I can see the ship on a Broadway stage already. Some stage designer is going to have a...
It would be hard to really... the scale of these ships was pretty amazing, but we'll see. I'd like it done with acting rather than mechanical coup de théâtre, you know.
Right. I mean, you can even do it with some kind of with imagery in terms of.
Well, at the Public Theatre, we do it with film, with projection, which is very effective. But I'm not sure how we're going to do it. I just don't want it to be a hugely expensive production. I really don't. I want it to be able to be performed one day in schools with a guitar in a classroom. That for me would be an ideal.
And when they hear it, what is the story you want them to hear?
I want them to be moved by something beyond their experience, and yet I think there are universal themes within that we recognized almost everywhere. In the Midwest, in places like Detroit. The themes of what happens to a community when you take away the reason for it being there in the first place. These men built things. They built palpable things with their hands that they could look at. We don't anymore.
And so having nothing to do with their own skills or lack of, having nothing to do with how hard they worked. everything is lost.
We become alienated, you know, and our sense of self, who we are as men and women.
And does this reflect a political philosophy as well?
My political philosophy? Yeah. I think you have to have economics, but they have to be balanced by community. Without a community to buy what you're producing, it's out of balance. So we need community to look after community, but we also need economics. It's a balance. That's my belief.
Is there any religion in this?
Oh, there's bags of religion.
Yeah.
You know, I was brought up in an Irish Catholic community, and there are. Our priest is more of the liberation theologist than the right wing.
Exactly. And God would want you workers to rise up. Is that the idea?
Yeah, he's very much to the left wing of the church, as I remember it in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah. Are you still a practicing Catholic?
No, I'm not. I'm a devout musician. But that's my...
That's your religion,
That's
you mean?
my spiritual path, seriously.
Yeah. What does it mean to you? I mean, it's life itself? The connection with music that lives within you?
Music, for me, is the mystery, the constant journey towards understanding. And you will never get there. You will never get to the end of music or the end of harmony. It is something that I've given my life to, and I will continue to.
On this program, we have done a series of programs about the brain, and one of the things that fascinates me is the connection between music and the brain. You know, the whole interesting thing about the creative act. You know, and now with imagery, what you can see within the brain as sound and sight affected.
I took part in a scientific program where they plugged musicians' brains up and played them music, and musicians actually use more of their brain to process music than ordinary people do, which is interesting. In fact, I can't have a conversation when there's any kind of music playing. It's a curse. If there's music in a restaurant, I can't have a conversation. I have to process the music first.
Really?
Really. So I prefer silence. I don't like music.
So if you're in a restaurant,
I ask them to turn it down.
You ask, do you really? I said, please.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, at least to a level that is not too obtrusive.
Do you understand why some of us are not musicians and others are?
No, I don't. I mean, I'm grateful I'm a musician.
Yeah, but I mean, you understand was music in the house. I mean, your mother listened to Broadway tunes, didn't she?
Oh, well, my mother had all of Rodgers and Hammerstein and, My Fair Lady, West Side Story. So I played those records to death, and I learned a lot of harmony from listening to Richard Rodgers. I steal from the best, basically.
If you're going to steal, that's a place to go.
All musicians steal. That's what we do.
All artists steal, don't they?
Of course we do.
In a sense, because you're just soaking up what's around you, and it inspires you, and therefore you give voice to, whether it's through painting or whether it's through literature, you're giving voice to what you're hearing, so you're stealing from what you're hearing.
Artists are interpreters.
Right.
Originality is a very rare commodity.
Yeah. This is what you told me in...
Oh, no.
This is you. So what are you writing now?
What am I writing? I've embarked on a project that both excites me and terrifies me. I'm trying to write a musical play with a playwright called Brian Yorkie, who just won the Pulitzer for a play called Next to Normal.
Right.
And it's based upon an album I did many, many years ago about my hometown, Newcastle in the north of England, the death of my father and the death of the industry, which was shipbuilding. And it's a mood piece, and I'm trying to make it into a book and a play. And it's terrifying. And I wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat thinking, what am I doing? How am I going to do this? At the same time, I'm very galvanized by it.
That was at the beginning of the process.
Oh, I knew what I was embarking on, that it wasn't going to be easy at all.
But do you feel now, I got it, somehow, some way, we've got it?
I think we're on the journey to getting it. I don't think...
But are you up to speed?
We're certainly up to speed. The path for the course for producing a musical is usually 5 to 10 years. We've got this far very, very quickly. That may be good, may be bad. I don't know. I'm just very cautious, very cautious.
Have you always been that way?
No.
No, I didn't think so.
No,
I mean,
but
the impression I've had of you always is a certain confidence in your own exploration.
I'm confident about that. But I also respect this
risk-taking.
medium. This medium is very hard. I don't expect...
Musical theater.
Musical theater is very difficult. I don't expect to walk in and have all the answers. I don't. I'm humble.
How is it different now than it was at the last time we spoke, in terms of the collaboration, in terms of the fact that it is now being performed?
Every time you get to a hurdle and you bring more and more people into your confidence, into your sense that you're doing something right, you feel better and better and better. And every day we put this in front of an audience and they applaud and they cheer and they tell me what they think. I feel vindicated and I feel we're on the right track. But it's a journey, and we still have a ways to go.
Is perfection at the end of the journey, or just a point?
Never get perfection.
All right, but suppose I could take this. Suppose that I knew you and you came to me and you said, you know a lot of people.
Yeah.
Here is something about my growing up. I mean, it is about memory. It is about religion. It is about the economy. It is about what happens to a place when it loses its economic vitality. What happens to the lives, and here it is. Could I go take this music and take it to Joe Mantell and they could simply take it and say, it's easy now. We know how to tell a story. You've got the music. We know your story. We can see, feel, and hear it. All we have to do now is figure out how to stage it. Could they do that with just this? Is this the hard work of a musical theater right here?
That's the raw material from which the play is being carved.
Yeah. But this is the core of it.
It is.
This is really the... I'm holding in my hand...
It has a heart. That's a heart.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. This is the beating heart of this thing.
It needs to have arms and legs put in the right place.
But this is the great leap forward.
Yeah. Without the heart, there's nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But then, isn't that at least half the journey, to have the heart?
There'd be no point in carrying on with the journey if there was no heart beating.
No, but this is the great, where you this is obviously without this, nothing, clearly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but it just seems to me it's to listen to you and to see the passion you have and to hear the songs, to know what they're about. You really, that takes you a long way.
Oh, absolutely. My daughter came the other day to our performance of these songs, and she said, "Dad, I understand more about you now than I've ever understood."
Done. Yes.
And I cried. Yeah. That's what she said. She was moved.
Understand more. And did she elaborate what she understands?
She didn't need to elaborate anymore.
You knew.
She said she understood me and who I am, and I was very grateful for that.
We had a thing happen today on the morning program, and it was about Frank Gehry, the great architect, doing a thing called a Note to My Younger Self, in which, at his age, now 84, with enormous success, and he grew out of being from an artist to architecture, writing about it. And he just, in the story, he talked about his parents. And he sent me a note this afternoon saying, how moved he was. It's the sense of, as an adult, being reconnected to the beginning and seeing his parents, that kind of thing.
I think, sometimes people would say to you, are you stuck in the past? I would say no, but the more you investigate the past, the more nuanced and interesting a landscape it becomes. You see hidden logic, you see reasons that you didn't see before. It's a fascinating landscape. And it's who I am now. The decisions I make now as an adult are very much formed in those first few years, where you are, how I think, why I believe what I believe, what I say. It's all there.
Did you have to go back and walk the streets to
My street is
Kendall?
No longer there. My street was knocked down at the same time as the shipyard, and they found a Roman army camp underneath. So where I lived is now an archaeological dig.
Wow. And in your own evolution, where do you put this?
This is just the latest in my evolution. I'm a work in progress and always will be.
Thank you. Great to see you.
Thank you.
This is musical theater coming to Chicago in, I guess, June 2014. And then in the fall, clearly coming to Broadway, The Last Ship, Sting. Here now, a wonderful opportunity to have Sting perform The Last Ship here in this studio.
Sails, oh, the roar of the chains and the cracking of timbers, the noise at the end of the world in your ears, as a mountain of steel makes its way to the sea.